Syrian troops have shelled two rebel-held areas of the central city of Homs. Activists have said that this has happened in an apparent violation of an internationally brokered ceasefire. Also this evening, the empty, lonely stretch of ocean where Titanic sank, Scotland the skint, and Neptune Collonges wins the Grand National. Good evening. Syrian troops have shelled two rebel-held areas of the central city of Homs in an apparent violation of internationally brokered ceasefire, activists have said. The reports came 2 days after the truce brokered by international envoy Kofi Annan went into effect. The violence in Syria since then has been much less than of the daily norm of clashes and shellings before ceasefire. The regime restricts access of foreign observers, including journalists, making it difficult to verify reports of violence independently. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the shelling lasted for about an hour, but there were no reports of casualties. Activist Tarek Brakman, who is based at the rebel-held Kaldeye area of Homs, and the observatory said this shelling targeted the Juret el-Sareh and Kawabis areas. The shelling in Homs came as the United Nations Security Council prepared to vote on a resolution authorizing the development of the first wave of UN military observers to monitor the ceasefire between the Syrian government and the opposition fighters. The truce is at the centre of Kofi Annan's peace plan, which is aimed at ending more than a year of bloodshed that, according to the UN, has killed more than 9,000 people. The plans then aims to launch inclusive Syrian-led talks on the country's political future. The uprising began at least a year with mostly peaceful protests against Assad's family dynasty, which has ruled Syria for more than 4 decades, but the government's violent crackdown fueled an armed insurgency as army defectors and protesters began fighting back. Yesterday, Syrian forces used live fire, tear gas and clubs to beat back tens of thousands of protesters who took to the streets across the country in powerful and often jubilant displays of defiance. The local coordination committee's activist group said there were 771 demonstrations throughout Syria, a number that is larger than the protests of weeks before. Activists said security forces killed at least 6 people yesterday, a lower than usual toll. The rallies, described as some of the largest in months, stretched from the suburbs of Damascus to the central province of Hama Lidib in the north and southern province of Dara, where the uprising began in March 2011. The observatory said today that troops were carrying out a wave of arrests in the Damascus suburb of Dumair, when a car exploded, killing 1 civilian and wounding 2 others. It gave no further details. In Homs, which has been one of the hardest hit areas in Syria in the past 13 months and became the symbol of Syria's uprising, the sporadic shelling started last night and continued into this morning, Mr. Brakman has said. I could see black smoke billowing from a building that was hit in Juret el-Sareh, he told the Associated Press via Skype. Survivors of Titanic spoke of a supernaturally calm sea that night, smooth as glass they call it. They described a sky so clear that you could see 1,000 stars. You cannot be at this spot without wishing there had been a little more wind on April the 14th, 1912, then there would have been a swell. If sea conditions had just been a little different that night, perhaps Frederick's fleet would have seen waves breaking at the foot of the iceberg. Shivering in the crow's nest of Titanic, the young lookout might have given the bridge a few more prestigious seconds to react. It is that agonizing combination of fateful events that doomed the ship. The sea conditions, the ship's speed and course, the silence from the nearby ship Californian. If only one of these had been different, the Titanic would have docked in New York and a great marine disaster would have been averted. On board our cruise ship are a small number of descendants of whose died aboard Titanic. The ceremony tonight will be emotional for them. There will be prayers and a period of reflection. At 2:20 a.m. Atlantic time, a band that will play the very hymn that the Titanic musicians never finished as the ship sank. Everyone on board our vessel will look down at the ocean and imagine the scene of a century ago. We reflect on those epic tragic events, the magnificence of the maiden voyage, the fateful collision, and the launching of lifeboats, the increasingly desperate radio messages, the terrible loss of life. And every one of us on board, believers, agnostics, and atheists alike, will say a prayer for those 1,500 souls lost at the spot 100 years ago. The Economist has waded into the row over the Scottish independence with scathing editorial on the economics of such a move. The magazine that Scottish independence would come at a hefty price and that Scotland would be left as one of Europe's vulnerable, marginal economies. The Scottish National Party took particular exception to the front cover, a map of the country renamed Skintland. Glasgow is renamed as Glasgow, Edinburgh becomes Edinboro, and Highlands are high interest lands. First Minister Alex Salmond told Radio Clyde the magazine would rue the day it insulted Scotland. Alex Salmond said the article was not even funny, just offensive, and that it would help increase the popularity of his party. Sport, and with some 600 million TV viewers around the world, the Grand National is the biggest event in the horse racing calendar. Daryl Jacob has won the 2012 Grand National riding Neptune College. Tony McCoy fell from Synchronized ahead of the 2012 Grand National. Synchronized bolted, but was quickly caught and did start the race, but fell at the Breches Brook fence. Sadly, Synchronized and, according to Pete, have been put down after injuries at the Grand National chase. And finally, football, and Liverpool had victory in the second half of the game between them and Everton, with the score at full time 2-1 to Liverpool. That is it from all of us here on the Weekend Team. Good night.